Welcome back. As we mentioned, Congress is back in session, and Republican lawmakers are taking a victory lap as they prepare for day one of the new Trump administration. Meanwhile, Democrats are discussing their path forward after a sweeping defeat on election night. Here's what House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries said about it this morning.
We're going to have a family conversation that needs to be clear-eyed, candid, and comprehensive to figure out what happened on election night. We've got to, as Democrats, work with the incoming administration whenever and wherever possible and strongly disagree when necessary. And that's going to be the approach that we take.
As a Harris campaign co-chair. So thank you so much, Congressman, for being here. I want to start with the Democratic soul searching that we're seeing here. Last time you were on this program before the election, you talked about the Harris campaign reaching out to Latino voters and in particular Latino men with Vice President Harris's economic agenda. But we saw, of course, President-elect Trump make strong gains with those very voters. Why do you think those voters chose President-elect Trump over Vice President Harris? And what do you think needs to happen now?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, obviously, I think we're all very grateful to the vice president and her team. I think they did a phenomenal job in a short time for a campaign. I think what's really important right now is that the Democratic Party does a lot of listening. I think we lost. We have to acknowledge that. Obviously, not just the White House, but clearly the Senate. And we certainly would have loved to do better on the House side and win more seats and actually win the House. And so acknowledging that we have work to do, especially on not just what the actual message is, which I believe is a message that we are the party of working class people, but actually also where we are communicating. And I think there are a lot of spaces out there, particularly where Latino men and other young men are engaged in, or listening to, that we're not present in. That's clearly something that has to change. I'm hopeful to be part of that. I think we all have to be a part of that. But the most important thing is to do the research right now and to listen where we can do better.
And as you do that research, I wonder, in hindsight, do you think there were warning signs that Democrats missed or chose to even ignore as you look at what happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think about, I think, look, the Harris campaign invested heavily, and the party did heavily on reaching young men and Latinos across the country. So we were seeing those investments every single day. But I think back to this conversation I had when I was back in Nevada, maybe a month before the election. I met with about 35, 40 undecided young Latino men, all probably in their 20s and 30s. And these were all union folks, construction workers. And one of the things that they really spoke to was that they weren't hearing enough about what the Democratic Party wanted to do for them, and they weren't hearing enough about the economy and working class issues. And the thing that I asked them is where they were getting their information from. And none of them said the cable news or newspapers. I mean, these were folks that were getting their information from YouTube channels, from podcasters, from digital media, from social media. And so one big lesson for us is I think that we have to do a better job of communicating, especially in these communities like Latino men and others, and actually go where they are actually consuming media. And that's something we have to do a much better job of. And I think the Harris campaign, I think, now understands that. I think us Democrats in the House do as well.
Yeah, I talked to a lot of voters who really got a lot of their information even from WhatsApp, when talking about sort of people passing information to each other. Now, with that being said, I want to play with you some sound from Progressive Caucus Chair, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, and what she said yesterday. Take a listen.
Clearly, not enough voters knew what Democrats were going to do to make their lives better, particularly poor and working class Americans across this country. Look, I have said that I think we need to rebuild the party. I think for too long our party has been held hostage to big money interests.
That's a strong message there. You're, of course, a member of the Progressive Caucus. So do you agree that the Democratic Party needs to be wholly rebuilt? And what does that practically look like?
I mean, first, obviously, I'll first what Chairwoman Jayapal said, I think, at the start of her comments, which was about making sure that we are communicating and getting our message out in a better way. I couldn't agree with more. I think that we are just not in those spaces, and we're not pushing our working class message. I think overall, I think what we need to do right now is just listen to our voters and listen to the American public as to what they are not either learning about or hearing from us as Democrats. But overall, I think our party has and will continue to be the party of working people. It's a party of reproductive health care. It's a party of lowering costs. It's a party of unions. It's a party that has supported students and working class people. I think those are things that we should be proud of, that we should continue to fight and push for. But absolutely, I think as far as where we're messaging those things, I think we've got to do a better job at. And I think we have to actually listen and take stock as to what people are actually telling us, what they want to hear from us. And so that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And I look forward to doing that in the weeks ahead.
And President-elect Trump has made clear that prioritizing mass deportation is going to be one of his biggest priorities. He's tapped Tom Homan to be his border czar. I want to play for you a little bit of what he said earlier this week.
I've seen some of these Democratic governors say they're going to stand in the way. They're going to make it hard for us. Well, a suggestion: if you're not going to help us, get the hell out of the way if we're going to do it. So if we can't get assistance from New York City, and we may have to double the number of agents we send to New York City, because we're going to do the job. We're going to do the job without you or with you.
What's your response to that, especially when you think about what Democrats can do to block the mass deportation plan that seems to be coming, especially if Republicans have all of this control in Washington?
Let me just first say that as an immigrant myself, I think those comments and the way that he and the Trump administration are talking about human beings, I think it's really shameful. I think that this idea that we're going to mass deport millions of people from this country, hardworking people that are contributing, that are actually on a pathway, many of them, to residency or citizenship. I think it's personally anti-American. I think about the time of my life when I was here in this country as a college student, trying to attain citizenship, and what I felt at the moment. All these students that they're just trying their best to contribute to this country. So I think the better approach is actually working with the Democrats on comprehensive immigration reform, not these attacks on migrants and working people.
I want to ask you one more thing, which is there's the guardrails here. How do Democrats put any sort of check on President-elect Trump's power when you think about the fact that he might have the Senate, the presidency, and maybe even the House as well?
Well, I think, one, we're going to have to call out every single lie, every single tragedy that they're trying to impose on the American people, programs that they're trying to implement that actually hurts people. We have got to be loud, put as much energy and put it out there as much as possible everywhere folks are consuming information. I think at the same time, as Democrats in the minority in the House, we actually did a pretty good job in this last cycle, actually stopping a lot of really bad proposals by Republicans. They're going to need to work with Democrats on a variety of issues, including taxes and spending. And so we've got to use our leverage and not be afraid to push back and fight for the people that are counting on us. And I think that's really, really important. So we'll do what we can, but absolutely, if Republicans control all levers of government, it is going to be very hard work, but it's work we've got to try our hardest to do.
Yeah, well, certainly there are going to be some fights that we will be covering. So thank you so much, Congressman, for your time.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.